People used to tell me I was lucky. They'd say it at dinner parties, their voices soft with envy. "You've got the dream, Laura. A husband who cooks, who listens, who never raises his voice." I'd smile, pretending I didn't hear the unspoken words. And he's handsome too. Ethan Hensley was the kind of man who drew attention without trying. Polished, articulate, steady. The world adored him, and for a long time so did I. Our house sat at the end of Maplewood Lane, where the lawns were neat and the neighbors polite. Ethan kept our hedges trimmed, our car spotless, our life curated like a photograph. Every Sunday he'd hand me coffee in a white mug before church, kiss the top of my head, and whisper, "We make a good team." I believed it. I believed everything he said. There was only one thing off limits: the basement. He said it was where he stored his work tools and old files, a mess of things not worth my time. "You just get dusty," he'd laugh, brushing it aside with that easy charm that dissolved questions before they formed. So I let it go, just like I ignored the phone calls that came after midnight, or the faint metallic scent that sometimes drifted up through the floorboards when he worked late. I told myself every marriage had quirks, secrets even, but lately it felt like ours was built on them. Ethan would leave early, come home later, his smile growing tighter each day. Sometimes I'd wake to find him standing by the window, staring into the dark, motionless, like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. When I asked, he'd just say, "Old habits. Couldn't sleep." One evening, as we hosted neighbors for wine, Mrs. Collier from next door leaned over and whispered, "You're lucky, dear. Some men hide women. Yours just hides a basement." I laughed politely, but her words clung to me long after everyone left. That night, I lay beside Ethan, watching the rise and fall of his chest, and wondered if the man everyone admired was just a reflection, polished glass over something unrecognizable. I used to think secrets could only ruin other marriages, not mine. But somewhere below us, behind that locked door, something was humming, and I was starting to realize it wasn't the sound of tools. It was such a simple rule. "Don't go into the basement." Ethan said it on our second day in the house, his tone light, almost playful. "It's just where I keep my old tools and projects," he'd said, jangling the keys like a joke. "You'll thank me when you don't trip over something sharp." At the time, it didn't strike me as odd. Every couple had boundaries, right? A drawer, a diary, a locked room. But boundaries have a way of turning into walls. It started one gray afternoon after a week of rain. I noticed a dark stain blooming on the kitchen ceiling, the air damp with the smell of mildew. When I followed the sound of dripping water, it led me to the basement door, the one I had never touched. The metal handle was slick and cool beneath my fingers, and for a moment I almost turned it. Almost. Then I heard it. A low hum, mechanical, rhythmic. Not the sound of plumbing or electricity, but something deliberate. A faint metallic scrape followed, then silence. My pulse quickened. I bent closer, and that's when the scent hit me. Bleach, sharp, sterile, wrong. When Ethan came home that evening, I mentioned the leak. He smiled too quickly. "I already handled it," he said before I could finish. "You didn't go down there, did you?" The way he asked, not curious, not even angry, but measured, made something inside me tighten. I shook my head. "No, of course not." He exhaled, a small sigh that sounded like relief. Then he stepped close, brushing a stray hair from my face. "Good girl," he murmured. "It's a mess down there. You'd hate it." His voice was gentle, but his eyes didn't match. They lingered on mine for a heartbeat too long, as if searching for proof of a lie. That night he stayed up late again. I heard footsteps creak above the hum of the dishwasher, then the faint clink of keys. By the time I got out of bed, he was gone. The basement door, however, was freshly locked, the faint trace of bleach stronger than before. For the first time, I started to wonder if the man I married was protecting me from a mess, or protecting the mess from me. 10 years. A decade of smiles, routines, and the kind of love that photographs well. Ethan made sure our anniversary was picture perfect. A candlelit dinner, soft jazz, and the faint smell of vanilla from the candle he'd lit hours earlier. He presented the gift last, a small velvet box tied with a silver ribbon. When I opened it, my breath caught. Inside lay a vintage gold necklace, delicate and shimmering like something from another time. "It reminded me of you," Ethan said, watching me too closely. Elegant, rare. His words should have warmed me, but instead a chill slid through my spine. The pendant was old, but the clasp, clean and new, looked recently repaired. Later that night, while Ethan poured wine, I ran my fingers over the engraving. A single initial. C. I asked him what it stood for. He smiled. Custom jeweler's mark. Nothing special. His tone was easy, but his hand tightened slightly on the wine glass. After he fell asleep, curiosity, or maybe unease, drove me online. I searched for vintage gold necklace engraved C, half expecting nothing. But the headline that appeared turned my stomach. Local teacher, Claire Donovan, missing since June. Necklace among key identifiers. The accompanying photo showed her wearing the same pendant, the same engraved letter. My heart raced as I compared the images. Identical. Every curve, every mark. I told myself it had to be coincidence. Maybe Ethan bought it secondhand. Maybe it wasn't her necklace. But when I checked his email the next day, pretending to borrow his laptop, I found something worse. A receipt for an antique purchase from Donovan Estate Liquidation, dated 3 weeks after her disappearance. When Ethan returned home that evening, he wrapped his arms around me from behind, his breath warm against my ear. "You like the necklace?" he whispered. I nodded too quickly. "Good. You should wear it more often." "Looks right on you." I smiled back, my heart pounding against my ribs. The scent of bleach still lingered faintly from the basement, and for a moment, I swore I could hear that low mechanical hum again. As Ethan kissed the back of my neck, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, the gold glinting against my skin, and wondered who it had truly belonged to. And for the first time, I realized I might be sleeping beside a stranger. Ethan left before dawn that Friday, suitcase in hand, his usual calm smile in place. "Just a quick trip to Richmond," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "I'll be back Sunday night." His cologne lingered long after the sound of his car faded down the street. I stood in the doorway watching the empty road, trying to ignore the gnawing unease that had been living in my chest since the night of the necklace. By noon, curiosity or fear had become unbearable. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the hallway clock. I moved through each room until I reached his office. The door wasn't locked, not this time, but the air inside felt heavier somehow, like stepping into a secret. Ethan's desk was spotless, every pen aligned, every file labeled. My reflection stared back at me from the black screen of his laptop. It took only one wrong move, a guess at his password, to get in. Our anniversary date. The irony stung. At first, the folders looked ordinary. Invoices, clients, tax docs. But then my eyes caught on another section buried deeper. Archives. Inside were folders named after women, each labeled with a first initial and last name. C. Donovan, L. Parker, M. Reyes. I opened one, hands trembling. Dozens of images filled the screen. Photographs of women smiling, candid shots, even surveillance-like stills. The timestamps spanned months. Notes were attached in tidy, clinical writing. Observed, acquired, disposed. The air seemed to vanish from the room. My throat tightened as I scrolled faster, the faces blending together. Each one had been someone's daughter, sister, friend. Then I saw it, C. Donovan, the same missing teacher from the article. Her photo stared back at me, the same necklace glinting at her throat, the one now hanging around mine. A low ringing filled my ears. I slammed the laptop shut, gasping. For a long time, I just sat there, paralyzed, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. There had to be an explanation. Ethan worked in logistics, not whatever this was. Maybe these were clients, research, anything but what my gut was screaming. Then, through the panic, came a sound that froze me to the core. Tires crunching on gravel. I glanced at the clock. 3 hours early. Heart pounding, I hurried to erase the laptop's recent history, fingers shaking so violently I mistyped the command. The garage door creaked open. Footsteps, the front door clicked shut. "Laura?" Ethan's voice carried down the hallway, calm and familiar. I shut the laptop, stood, and forced a smile just as the office door handle began to turn. The moment Ethan stepped into the office, his expression softened into that practiced warmth I used to mistake for love. He looked pale, he said, setting down his briefcase. Everything okay? I forced a shaky smile, my pulse still racing. Just a long day, I murmured. Didn't expect you home so soon. He studied me quietly. Traffic was light. Then his gaze drifted toward the desk. Were you in here? For a heartbeat, the air between us thickened. I lied before I could think. I was dusting. His lips curved into a faint smile. You never dust my office. I was bored. He stepped closer, his hand brushing a stray hair from my cheek. You've been tense lately, Laura, not sleeping well. Seeing things that aren't there. His voice was low, steady. The same tone he used when soothing a child. You need rest, not worry. I'm not imagining things, I said, trying to sound firm. But it came out like a whisper. Ethan's eyes softened with something that almost looked like pity. Sweetheart, you've always had a vivid imagination. That's what I love about you. But sometimes it plays tricks. He guided me gently toward the living room, his hand never leaving my shoulder. You read too many crime articles, watch too many dark shows. It's no wonder you're jumpy. He poured me a glass of wine, the same red we shared on our anniversary, and placed it in my hand. Drink, he said softly. It'll help. I hesitated, then took a sip, my mind spinning. He sat beside me close enough that his voice was barely a murmur. You trust me, don't you? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe the calm in his eyes, the steady rhythm of his voice. But every instinct screamed no. Of course, I finally said. He smiled, satisfied. Good, because I'd never hurt you. You know that, the way he said it. Not I wouldn't, but I'd never made my skin crawl. That night he held me until I fell asleep, whispering soft reassurances against my hair. But as my eyes fluttered shut, I heard the faint jingle of keys slipping into his pocket and the quiet click of the basement door locking once more. The knock came just after breakfast, 3 sharp taps that sliced through the quiet. Ethan looked up from his newspaper, calm as ever. Expecting someone? He asked. I shook my head, my stomach twisting. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, late 20s, sharp eyes, badge glinting in the morning light. Detective Claire Morton, she said, her tone polite but firm. Sorry to disturb you, Mrs. Hensley. May I come in? Before I could answer, Ethan was already behind me, charm switched on like a light. Of course, he said smoothly. Please, coffee. My wife makes the best. Claire stepped inside, scanning the living room. Her gaze lingering on the framed photos, the spotless floor, the curated perfection of our lives. She smiled faintly. Lovely home. I imagine it takes effort to keep things this immaculate. Ethan chuckled, resting a hand on my shoulder. Laura has a gift for order. I'm just the lucky one who benefits. Something flickered in the detective's eyes. Curiosity, maybe suspicion. She set her notebook on the table. We're following up on several missing person reports, she said. Women who vanished near cities where Mr. Hensley's company operates. Ethan didn't flinch. My schedule's public, he said lightly. I travel for logistics contracts. If there's something specific you need, I'll gladly help. Claire nodded but didn't look at him. She looked at me. Mrs. Hensley, has your husband ever mentioned meeting any of these women? She slid a photo forward. Claire Donovan's smile stared up at me, frozen in a moment that now felt like a haunting. I forced my expression still. No, I whispered. I don't think so. Ethan's hand tightened subtly on my shoulder, a warning disguised as affection. My wife doesn't involve herself in my business, he said smoothly. The detective's gaze held mine for a long, silent moment. I wondered if she could hear my heart pounding, if she could see the fear behind my practiced smile. Finally, she stood. Thank you for your time. If anything comes to mind, please call. As the door closed behind her, Ethan turned to me, still smiling, though his eyes were cold. See, nothing to worry about, he murmured. Honesty always helps. But as her car pulled away, I caught a glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, watching our house far too long to be casual. Ethan's phone buzzed just after 9 that night. He answered quietly, his tone clipped. Yes, I'll handle it tonight. When he hung up, he smiled at me like nothing had changed. Late shift again, sweetheart. Don't wait up. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his keys, and disappeared into the darkness. But the moment the door shut, I felt something inside me shift, resolve replacing fear. I waited 5 minutes, then grabbed my coat and followed. The rain had started, soft but relentless, tracing silver lines across the windshield as I trailed his car through the winding streets of town. He drove past the main road, past the warehouses near the edge of the industrial district, a place I'd never known he went. Finally, he turned into a secluded lot, headlights flashing briefly on a faded sign, Hensley Storage and Supply. My breath caught. His family name? I parked a block away and crept closer, heart hammering. Through a cracked window, the faint light of a single fluorescent bulb flickered. I crouched behind a stack of old crates, peering inside. Ethan stood at a metal table, sleeves rolled up, gloves on. He moved with precision, methodical and calm. Laid out before him were stainless steel instruments, scalpels, clamps, forceps, glinting under the harsh light. He dipped each one into a basin of clear liquid, wiping them clean with almost reverent care. The air shimmered with the sharp tang of bleach and iron. Then I saw it. A dark tarp unfurled across the concrete floor, the edges soaked in something thick and red. A shape beneath it, too still, too human. A muffled cry escaped my throat and I clamped my hand over my mouth. Ethan froze. For a second he looked up toward the window, eyes scanning the shadows. My lungs locked. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. After a long moment, he turned back to his work, humming softly under his breath. A familiar tune, the same one he used to whistle while making breakfast. I stumbled back from the window, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. By the time I reached the car, my vision was blurred with tears. The necklace around my neck felt heavier than ever, like a chain. Somewhere behind me, the warehouse light went out. He knew. I saw it the moment I stepped through the door the next morning. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, still as stone, hands folded neatly in front of him. The smell of coffee filled the room, bitter and burnt. "Sleep well?" he asked, voice calm, too calm. My throat went dry. I did. "You got home late?" He smiled faintly, eyes never leaving mine. "Not that late. Though I imagine you'd know." The mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the tile. For a heartbeat, the silence between us was unbearable. Then he stood, moving with deliberate ease, like a predator in no hurry. "You followed me, didn't you?" I shook my head, but my voice betrayed me. "I was worried." "Worried," he echoed, tasting the word like poison. "You should be." He stepped closer, every trace of charm stripped away. The man I thought I knew, the patient husband, the perfect neighbor, and it was gone. What remained was something colder, sharper. "Do you think you're the first person to doubt me?" he said, his tone almost conversational. "They all did, eventually. But they learned too late that truth isn't what people think it is." My voice trembled. "Who are you, Ethan?" He tilted his head, smiling. Not kindly this time, but with something dark behind it. "I fix mistakes. Erase them. Some call it killing. I call it cleansing. They were already dead, Laura. I just made it official." I stumbled back, gripping the counter. "You murdered them." He laughed softly, almost pitying. "Murder? No, they begged for it in their own ways. People disappear every day. I just give them a cleaner ending." Tears burned my eyes. "And Claire Donovan? Did she beg too?" His expression hardened. "She was a liability. You're becoming one too." For a long moment we stared at each other. Husband and wife, love turned into something unrecognizable. Then, just as quickly as it came, the rage faded. His voice softened again, almost tender. "But I don't want to lose you, Laura. You still make me feel human." He reached out, brushing my cheek with a bloodless hand. I didn't move, didn't breathe, and in that silence, I realized the only way out of this marriage was through him. After that night, the house became a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light felt like a test. A silent challenge to keep breathing without giving myself away. Ethan was calm again, frighteningly so. He made breakfast, asked about my sleep, kissed my forehead before leaving the room. To anyone else, we were the same loving couple. But I knew now he was watching, always watching. The morning after his confession, I found the small voice recorder I'd once used for my teaching notes. I hid it inside the hollow of an old photo frame in the kitchen, angled toward the table where he usually sat. My hands trembled as I tested it. A faint red light blinked once before fading. Proof. That was all I needed now. Proof strong enough to make him fall. "Laura," he called from the hallway, "come here." I wiped my tears, forcing a steady breath before answering. Coming, love. He was in the living room, arranging flowers in a vase. Red roses, their stems too sharp. You've been quiet lately, he said softly. I don't like it when you shut me out. I'm just processing, I replied. What you told me, it's a lot. He nodded, almost sympathetic. It's the truth, Laura. I didn't lie to you. I never have. I stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. I know, I whispered. You did what you had to. I just need to understand you better. That was the moment his suspicion eased. A flicker of trust returned to his eyes. He cupped my face, smiling faintly. That's my girl, I smiled back, even as bile rose in my throat. Every word I spoke from then on was a lie, every touch a calculation. I listened to his stories, the assignments, the clients, the ones who deserved to vanish. My heart screamed, but my voice stayed even. Each night when he slept, I'd replay the recordings through a hidden earpiece, memorizing every detail, every admission. The sound of his voice describing their final moments haunted me, but I clung to it. It was my only weapon. Still, I couldn't stop shaking, because beneath all the horror, one thought burned louder than the rest. If I failed, I wouldn't just end up like the women in those files. I'd end up buried beside them, and Ethan would still bring me roses. The morning it all unraveled. The air felt unnaturally still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Ethan left before dawn, claiming a client meeting out of town. I stood at the window and watched his taillights vanish into the fog, then picked up the burner phone Detective Morton had given me weeks ago. My hands shook as I texted the single word she'd been waiting for. Now. Within the hour, unmarked cars filled our cul-de-sac. The quiet hum of suburban life was shattered by the synchronized rhythm of boots, radios, and low voices. I stood on the porch, numb, clutching a cup of cold coffee as Morton approached, her expression a mix of triumph and pity. Mrs. Hensley, she said gently, we have the warrant. I nodded. You'll find what you need in the basement. When the lock cracked open, the metallic scent of bleach and decay spilled out, sharp and suffocating. Officers covered their mouths as they descended. I stayed by the doorway, refusing to step inside. I couldn't bear to see what I'd already seen in my nightmares. The clatter of evidence bags and the murmur of forensic techs echoed up the stairs like a dirge. Then came the words that made my knees give way. Multiple remains confirmed. Female, early 30s, possibly more. Detective Morton knelt beside a large stainless steel table lined with surgical instruments. Among them she found notebooks, neat, meticulous, dated. Each entry paired with a photograph, each photograph marked by initials. One folder labeled C. Donovan made her face tighten. She didn't need to say it aloud. We both knew the name. Outside, the press began to swarm. Helicopters droned overhead, their lenses pointed at the house that once hosted garden parties and anniversaries. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls inside, turning our family portraits into ghostly flashes of guilt and memory. By afternoon, Ethan's face was on every screen. Suburban surgeon suspect in multiple disappearances. The man everyone envied was now a monster the nation couldn't stop watching. As officers escorted me to a waiting car, I looked back at the home that had been my prison and my stage. My reflection in the car window stared back, hollow, unrecognizable. Detective Morton placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Laura. I wanted to believe her. But as the cameras flashed, one thought pierced through the chaos. If the world finally knew Ethan's secrets, what would they think when they learned mine? The courthouse smelled of polished marble and fear. Every sound, the click of heels, the whisper of papers, felt amplified, like the building itself was listening. Ethan sat at the defense table in his tailored suit, hands folded neatly, posture straight. He looked more like a grieving husband than a man accused of murder. Cameras adored him still. The ideal husband had not lost his poise. When the judge entered, the room rose in a wave of tense silence. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, hungry for the next headline. I sat behind the prosecution, my palms sweating, my heart clawing against my ribs. I told myself to breathe. I told myself he couldn't hurt me anymore. Then he turned just once. A small, polite smile, the same one he used to give me at dinner parties. My stomach twisted. Even in chains, he controlled the air around him. His testimony was a performance. Calm, articulate, dripping with self-pity. "My wife misunderstood my work," he said softly. "I helped families find closure when no one else could. My methods were unconventional but never malicious." His voice broke at the right places. Some jurors looked moved. Others simply looked confused. When it was my turn, the bailiff called my name and the world went quiet. I walked to the stand on trembling legs, aware of every flash from the gallery. The prosecutor's voice steadied me. "Mrs. Hensley, please describe your husband's behavior the night before his arrest." I stared at Ethan, at the man I once believed was my home, and began to speak. The words poured out, the basement, the bleach, the whispers, the lies. My voice wavered, but I didn't stop. For once, I didn't let him interrupt me. At one point, I looked up and caught Detective Morton's gaze from the back row. Her small nod was the anchor I needed. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Ethan's mask cracked just slightly, a flicker of rage in his eyes before he looked away. As I stepped down from the stand, the cameras exploded again, capturing what they thought was justice in motion. But justice, I knew, wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the reckoning. It had been 8 months since the verdict. Ethan Hensley, the surgeon of suburbia, as the headlines called him, was sentenced to life without parole. The cameras had long moved on, the neighbors stopped whispering, and the town's fascination faded into another Netflix documentary. But the silence that followed was worse than the noise. I sold the house, changed my name, and moved into a small coastal cottage overlooking gray, endless water. Every morning, the ocean wind swept through the windows, and I told myself I was breathing freedom. Yet at night I could still hear him as that steady, measured voice slipping into my dreams. "You'll never be free from me. Laura, you're a part of the story now." The world saw me as the survivor, the brave widow who faced her monster. Reporters requested interviews, magazines wanted my healing journey. I smiled for their cameras, spoke about resilience, forgiveness, and closure. But inside, something darker lived, a quiet echo of the man I once loved, the man whose darkness had intertwined with mine, until I couldn't tell where his control ended, and my fear began. Some nights, I sat by the window staring at my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who once baked pies for the church fundraiser or waited for her husband's goodnight kiss. She looked older, harder, yet still tethered to something invisible. Then, one gray afternoon, as the wind rattled the shutters, I noticed it. A plain brown envelope resting on my porch. No return address, just my new name printed in neat block letters. My pulse spiked as I picked it up. The postmark froze me. State Correctional Facility, Redwater, Pennsylvania. Inside, something shifted. That same airless dread I thought I'd buried in the basement of our old life. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The envelope sat on the table between the salt and the candle, untouched as the sun bled into the sea. Outside, the waves crashed endlessly against the rocks, rhythmic, precise, familiar, and for the first time in months, I whispered his name. "Ethan." The wind answered softly, almost lovingly, as if it never really left.